So Black liberals and leftists online have just been bickering from, I don't know how long they've been bickering for, but they've been bickering for months upon months. And we are now in 2025, a completely new year. Happy New Year to everybody. And they're still bickering. Like, they're still arguing about the election, about this, about that, like about Beyonce, about just bickering. It's actually very entertaining, but also disturbing. Because I'm just like, guys, can we just all get along? Can we all get along? And they're saying no. They're saying we can't get along. But I think in this discourse, there's a lot of conversation to be had about the specific divergence between not liberals and leftists, but Black liberals and Black leftists, because I think that the race component does impact how each of us feels about our political leanings. And I think that people aren't trying to understand each other in this conversation. I think that's what's missing. And when you're not trying to understand each other, there's no point in having the conversation. The conversation will always devolve. The conversation will always be unproductive. The conversation will always become one not of community, but one where people are trying to constantly sort of one-up each other. And I think that's what I see between the Black leftists and Black liberals on TikTok, on Twitter, on Instagram, Threads, anywhere where there are Black leftists and Black liberals, they are beefing. So I think to really break down this conversation, I think we have to ask the question of, like, what is the difference between Black liberalism and Black leftism? And so obviously, liberals want to make changes within capitalism, whereas leftists want a different economic system entirely. But I want to go a step further. So I'll talk about me and why I'm a leftist. So during the summer of 2020, this is when George Floyd was murdered by a police officer. I did a lot of reading. I was a freshman or rising sophomore in college. I was a political science student. So I was already doing a lot of reading on theory and like kind of coming into my own as a person and having more distinct ideas about what the world should be, as opposed to where it is and how I can get the world where it should be. And so I had a lot of grandiose thinking. I had a lot of, I just was a bit delusional back then. I had this like idea that I could be like a Marcus Garvey figure and like get Black people to move back to Africa, and that I myself would move back to Africa and would, save Africa from imperialism and colonialism and like start this revolution. Like I really, in my mind, and this is me at 19. So I'm 23, about to turn 24. So this is like 4.5, 5 years ago. So I'm pretty delusional, but the thing that stuck with me was recognizing that the system that we exist in, right, this white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal country, right, that happens to be like the major global power, that the ways in which I am suffering and the ways in which people who look like me are suffering is the intended outcome. And that is when I was like, bro, this reform stuff, we got to throw it out the window because the system is working well. Like this is it at its best. And some would argue, right, that there are still ways in which they can make it better. And when I say better, I mean worse for me. So coming to that realization that, oh, the system is working as intended is how I ended up with the politic that I have. And there's an Angela Davis quote, really good quote. She goes, I am a communist because I am convinced that the reason we have been forcefully compelled to eke out an existence at the very lowest level of American society has to do with the nature of capitalism. So the main reason why leftists are where they are is because they've had this moment of like realization that this is it, right? This is the best that capitalism can do. Truly, this is the best it can do. And this best is not good enough. So we need something else. And whether we have to imagine something else, whether we have to rethink the idea of states altogether, right? Because that's what anarchism is like, do we even need states? Do we need, and not like the United States, but I'm talking about states as in governments and whatnot. How, like, do we need to restructure capitalism? Oh, no, it doesn't work. We have to think of something new. What about socialism? How does that work? Could that be better? What about communism? I think that leftists and leftism, there is this sort of curiosity of like, what else can we do? Right? And sort of theorizing that. And though it's never been truly put into practice, just the belief that we can do better than what we have right now. And I think that's where a lot of Black leftists are. I think that is really the centralizing point of radical tradition, which is we can do better than this. Capitalism and whether or not it can be reformed is really the difference between liberals and leftists in general. But I think Black people's understanding of capitalism is more advanced than the average like white person or any other group, right, in America, any other marginalized demographic. I think Black people have the understanding that the system really can't be reformed fully. And so I think that for Black liberals, it's not just about whether or not the system can be reformed, but I think it's about the plausibility of a revolution, right? The plausibility of a complete upheaval of capitalism and whether or not that is realistic. And I think that's actually I think that's a very fair position for someone to take and be like, look, I know the system can't be reformed fully, but this whole revolution thing that y'all talking about, I don't think that can be done either. And I think that a lot of Black liberals exist in that sort of in between. And I think that's the nuance that is being sort of ignored in this conversation. So I will talk about some interactions that I've had, both with Black men who are probably in their early 50s or late 40s. And both of them talked to me about how at my age, they were very radical, right? And they truly had this belief that like, similar to me a few years ago, right? Where it's like, I have to, head up this revolution and yada, 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 right? That sort of thing. Just very militant in their belief that like America has got to go, which is very fair. But both of them talked about how as they developed as people, as they grew older, as they learned more about the world and how things work, one, wanting to mount a revolution against America is a very complex endeavor. And I think for them, they had to make up their minds about, is this the path I want to go? Is this really like, especially when it comes to like self-actualization and maybe the dreams and desires that they have, do I want to commit my life to a revolution that I probably will never see? Or can I make the most out of my existence within the system? And both of them were like, look, I'll do what I can to make things better for the people that are around me. One of them is like a big political organizer in Atlanta. And he was just talking to me about how like, I'll do whatever I can, but I don't think that the complete upheaval of capitalism is something that I can participate in because I don't think it's possible. Now we have to introduce the concept of capitalist realism. So it's a concept created by Mark Fisher. He has a book on it, actually. And essentially, capitalist realism is the widespread sense that not only is capitalism the only viable political and economical system, but also that it is now impossible to even imagine a coherent alternative to it. And so I realized that for a lot of Black liberals, the issue isn't the ideology associated with leftism that I think they have a problem with. It's the plausibility, and it's also just hope, right? There is a hopelessness in feeling like capitalism is the only thing that can exist, and that's where they are. And so knowing that's where they are, now I think I have to look at and assess leftists, especially online, and ask the question, are leftists inspiring hope in the people they're interacting with who are not leftists, and Black leftists specifically? And to tell you the truth, I don't think so. I don't think leftist behavior on TikTok has been inspiring. A lot of the people who were being introduced to radical thought, radical politics, radical Black tradition, and leftism have been introduced to it because of TikTok, right? Just recently, in the recent past. And so I think TikTok has offered this very unique opportunity for leftist thinkers, organizers, just people who align with leftist ideology politically, to build community, find like-minded people, and educate people, right? It's really become a space for that, which is why a lot of people are upset that TikTok is going to be gone. But what happened is some of these creators really lost the plot, and they're spending more time virtue signaling, bullying, arguing, getting embroiled into bizarre controversy and beefs. It's very reductive. It's childish behavior. It feels very high school. And I also think that some of their behavior in real life is being brought to the internet. And some of these people just don't seem like kind-hearted, nice people to be around. And it is harming how leftist ideology can be spread, because I think for those on the outside looking in, it's leaving a bad impression, not just of those creators, but of leftist ideology altogether. Because when you come on the internet and you say, I am this thing, right? If I come on the internet and I say I believe in leftist thought, people are going to look at you as a representative of everyone who thinks and believes this way. Is that right? Not necessarily, but that's just what is. That's just what it is. And I try to be very careful about how I engage with people. I'm not perfect. But I try to be careful about how I engage with people, how I talk to people offline, right? Like how I treat people in the DMs as well, because I know that if I'm out of pocket, people are going to think, man, that girl, she's a leftist and she kind of crazy. Like, I don't know how I feel about this ideology, because it seems like it attracts a certain type of person. So when you see Black leftists who are screaming at people in the DMs, who are grifting online, right? Like, when you see this pattern, people are going to associate that behavior with the ideology itself. And that's what's really dangerous about how leftists have acted, right? The issue is that these creators are not inspiring hope, and they are sowing chaos and discord amongst the masses on these platforms. And I would argue that I am part of the issue because I was silent. They've been bickering up and down my timeline for months, and I really didn't say that much. I may have made a video or two, and I chose self-preservation over addressing the discord. And I have a life. In my own defense, I do have a life, and I didn't think I could bring anything to the conversation that would make the conversation more valuable or provide a perspective that hadn't been shared. So I didn't say anything. But in doing so, I recognize that I think I have also done harm in not saying anything. Instead of empathizing or seeking to understand the hopelessness that exists within Black liberals, I think a lot of Black leftists want to make moral judgments, right? Character assassinations. And that's not how you reach people. That's not how you connect with people. It's about talking to them, not at them, right? Treating people with respect, the same respect that you want to be treated with, listening with the intent to understand and not just to respond. One of the things I recognize is that there was a time where I believed that reform was a solution, was the solution. There was a time where I thought that Black faces and high spaces would save us, right? Because that's what I was taught. That's what I was taught. The majority of people who believe in Black radical tradition did not grow up that way. You didn't grow up that way. At some point, you were radicalized. At some point, you started reading. Someone put bell hooks in front of you. Someone put Angela Davis in front of you, and you started reading. Someone made you read Black Power. So I think that one of the things I try to do with my platform is just introduce people to a new thought. That's it. I'm not trying to teach y'all. I'm not a teacher. I say it all the time. I'm not a teacher. I'm not I'm not a scholar. I'm not an intellectual. I'm none of those things. I am someone who has opinions and thoughts, and that differ from a lot of other people's opinions and thoughts. And so I try to introduce whoever sees my content just to a new idea. And you don't have to agree, right? You could think I'm dumb. You could think whatever you want to think, but ponder on it. And if you feel like, I'm not messing with it, I don't like it, you can move on. And I think that if leftists sort of engage with that in mind, they'll be able to have more conversations. But that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you all for watching me ramble. And yeah, peace.